Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Adoptee Fire Speaker Series. We have another great interview for you today, which is with a person I've come to have a lot of appreciation for, Peggie Arvidson, who is a voice rising in our adoptee community and someone that I think a lot of people are now coming to be more familiar with for something in particular that she's working on that we'll be discussing. But we're really thrilled to have her here. She's also a domestic adoptee like myself, born in the 1960s and adopted, I believe, in New Jersey. And she hasn't told her story yet. So I'm excited because Peggie's a podcaster in addition to her regular career. And so she's at this point now on the other side of this. And as somebody who's used to listening to the stories of other people, I really thought it was a great opportunity to give her a chance to talk and tell her story too. So wanted to welcome you, Peggie. Thanks so much for making time for us.
Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here. I am a little nervous, but I'm excited. And I know we're all friends, and my community is sitting right here in your own respective living rooms or bedrooms or wherever you are. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I feel like this is going to be a really natural interview for me, partly because I know a little bit about you and we've had a lot of interactions, and some of them have been kind of fun and light. Something you said that was of interest to me is I think something adoptees struggle with, which is, oh, my story is kind of regular or not very exciting. I hear myself say things like that. I hear other people say that. I think we have this tendency to want to say, maybe I don't have as glamorous or as exciting or as important of a story. And I think it's something we do to ourselves as adoptees. So I was struck when you said that, because I, of course, value everyone's story, and I know we all do, but wanted for everybody just to remember the importance of each of our individual accounts here and how much we value the vulnerability it takes for somebody to put their story out there. So thank you for this. And we can start at the beginning here. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your adoptee story, when you were adopted and when you found out about being adopted?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. I always knew I was adopted. I really don't know a time that was like a new word. So my guess is that it was just something that we talked about in the household. I'm sure it was age appropriate. I was born in Newark, New Jersey, at St. Michael's Home for Unwed Mothers. Well, it was, the Catholic place that all the girls went. Um, and I went to my parents' home either at 2 weeks or right away. I really don't know. My earliest documentation is that I was baptized on February 14th. I was born on February 1st. So clearly, I was with the people that are my parents, that I call mom and dad. And, the funny thing, I was talking to my mom recently about this, and why did you decide to adopt? Why Catholic Charities? Because I was adopted through Catholic Charities. And she said something really almost offhand, is that they were originally going to use a different religious group adoption program. Now, I don't know if that was like the popular program. I don't know what program it was. But this really kind of rocked my world, because I thought, oh my God, all of this Catholic Church stuff that I had to deal with, maybe, you know, because I was adopted through Catholic Charities. And of course, my parents are Catholic. But she said this other agency said, well, why don't you just go to your agency, meaning the Catholic Church? And that's how, it is those moments that hit you that it is random that I ended up in this world. So, born and raised in New Jersey, very always knew I was adopted. I have a brother who is also adopted, who's 2 years younger than me. And as often happens, I have a sister who is the biological child of my mom and my dad, and we are actually, fairly. I hate to use the term normal family, but we're still close to this day. My brother actually lives not far, and my sister's actually not too far from us, up in Northern Virginia. So after my dad passed, we all sort of came together and, we are, for all intents and purposes, a family with the good, the bad, and the different. And knowing I was adopted, I spent a lot of, I was very curious. I went to Catholic school and I was curious about everything, right? The things that the church is teaching you. And we had lay women that were our teachers, right? But we had religious studies. The priest would come in once a week for religious class. And he was, like picture, the bells of St. Mary, that priest with the cassock and all of that. But, and a very kind man, Father Gillick. And we were learning in the catechism or something to fear God. And I can remember very clearly asking him in first grade, Father Gillick, why do we have to fear God? And he, he's trying to explain this to a first grader. And at the end, he sort of said, well, why don't you go home and ask your parents? So I went home and I asked my parents at dinner, and they were like, well, why don't you ask Father Gillick? And that was the first moment that I realized grown-ups really don't have all of the answers, and I'm just going to have to figure this out myself. So I don't know if that necessarily ties into my adoption, but I always thought there was something different about me. I got the whole story that everybody or many of us do, that my mother couldn't take care of me. They never told me the sad derelict, whatever, just that she wasn't in a position where she could take care of me. Same thing with my brother's mother, and that they really wanted a family. And so they got me, right? And then I can remember clearly when my brother was coming home, they used to tell the story that I helped them pick him out, which doesn't make any sense, right? Because I couldn't have picked out my brother. But it was a nice story. And maybe that's why we're very close to this day. I don't know. So anyway, that's a very rambling bit of my adoption story. I always knew I went to Catholic school. I certainly was not the only adopted person I knew. One of my best friends, who I'm friends with today, lived across the street. She was adopted. The boys down the street were adopted. My cousins were always fostering, their parents were always fostering kids. It was not an unusual situation.
I think I was struck by, well, a number of things. One of the first ones was that they almost went, so to say, almost went with someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
And it highlights something I have always thought about, which is this, I call it the contingency of our identity. And I tried to explain it to one of my sisters. I could have gone home with someone else and I would be a different person. She said, I don't think so. I said, yeah. And just what you've highlighted here, that would rock your world, hearing something like that. Oh my goodness, how fragile the formation of me as a person could have been. I could have ended up somewhere else, could have had a completely different experience. Yeah, that's something else extraordinary. And I think, again, it highlights some of the things we try to tell people in society at large. It's just, there's something strange about this experience. There's certainly not what typically happens to people. So you heard these accounts kind of about relinquishment, maybe in an idealized sense, what they told you. But eventually you probably found out, I think, more about what actually happened in your relinquishment. Were you able eventually to figure anything out about that, and what really happened there?
Yeah, at 52, I figured it out. Obviously I knew that there was another mother, right? Because then when my mom was pregnant with my sister, you realize sort of how a baby comes into the world. And by then I was 5, 6, maybe. So, you're kind of paying a little more attention. But I would ask questions about, well, where are these other mothers? What are their names? That type of thing. And while they weren't angry, I think we're all very sensitive. And I was the oldest too. So I was always very sensitive of making my parents okay. And I've heard many, many stories, and I know many, many people, adopted and non, who had parents that really weren't okay. And for the most part, both my mom and my dad are pretty well adjusted people. I would say my father more than my mom, but that I think some people talk about they did all the things they weren't supposed to, but for me, they did everything right? They would answer my questions. They didn't tell us we don't talk about it, but it also wasn't I knew kind of it wasn't comfortable for them because they didn't necessarily have answers. And one time we would go camping. This was some wild hair that my mother got, and I don't think my dad liked it at all, but we would take these family camping trips, and we were setting up the camper, and my brother and I were helping. And I don't know why, but we asked the question of like, what are the names of our parents? And my dad, was tapping in or doing whatever, to set up the campsite and talking to us as he always did. And he said, we never found out because we really thought if we ever, if their last name was Hamburger, if we met somebody named Hamburger, we would always wonder. And we didn't want you to wonder too. And I thought that was a perfectly age appropriate way to say, we don't know who they are, but they do exist. And, we went on from there. I don't know what your original question was, Greg. I just had to go down that path.
It was around the question of relinquishment and what you found out about it. And you mentioned that at age 52, something.
Oh, yeah. So I started searching for my birth mother. I think, like many of us, I was very interested in what makes a person do this. What was that? This was well before I really started to understand from a spiritual point, from a medical point of view, from the science that we now know about our connections. I knew that there was something there, and why would somebody just leave me? And I don't know that I had the linear thought of I'm not worthy, but I think that it, certainly inflected everything. But I started searching about 16. My dad had given me the folder. The man had a folder for everything, just like me now, and gave me the folder with all of their notes, right? That had the receipt that they paid to the lawyer and and a letter that they had to write to take me to Florida, because I wasn't legally adopted. I don't know, in New Jersey then, maybe it was a year and a month and a day or something. So I was legally adopted. My new birth certificate is a year, a month, and 2 weeks after my original birthday. So I had all of that information, and I thought, well, I'll just call Catholic Charities. Anybody who has been through that, exactly how that went. And, I was 16 and nobody could really help me. And then I would stop and start and stop and start in so many areas of my life. And I hired a private investigator, but I didn't have enough money to have her do the whole thing. So she said, well, she's probably, at St. Michael's, and the documents that you have say she worked at the phone company and her father worked at the phone company in New Jersey. Back then it was Ma Bell, right? So it was New Jersey Bell. She said, you just probably want to go to New Jersey Bell. There's probably an archivist or somebody, and you'll, look for the same last name, which makes sense. And I knew it would probably be a Polish last name. So, but I couldn't, nobody would, oddly enough, nobody would answer the phone at the phone company. And by then, AT&T and all the splits. So then I got frustrated and gave it up, which is kind of my norm. That's too much work. I'm done. I'm going to go do something I can do well. But, DNA, I had a friend who worked kind of in genetic research and had set me up, I think, with FTDNA when you still had to pay. So she got me a thing for that. And no close matches. And then 23andMe a few years later, no close matches. And I was just like, screw this. I'm done. This isn't meant to be. By then I was doing a lot of my own spiritual work. I'd been divorced twice. There was a lot of stuff happening. And I was with the man who is my third husband. He wants me to say his final husband, but and there was all those commercials for Ancestry. He's like, you really should just do it. Just do it. You won't shut up about this, And I'm like, well, no, I'm not going to do it. There's nobody in my family anywhere. I have been everywhere on social media. I've put my name out there, my face out there. Somebody should be looking for me, damn it. That was my response. And he said, just do it. So I did it. But this was like that first time that they had that massive glut. And so it was like 6 months or something before they even got to my results and all of those things. And then I got the notification. And when I went in there, there was this match, a very close match. Turns out that it was my maternal uncle. And I had been carrying around the non-identifying information from Catholic Charities since I was 20, and now I'm 50, 52. So I'd memorized everything, right? It was my mother's first name and the name that she had put for my biological father. But my file was burned. So they had put together all this information from the files of two of my maternal aunts who had also given up children for adoption at Catholic Charities.
Wow.
So let's talk about giving away somebody else's information. But I had all of this information memorized after all of these years. So when this uncle said, I don't think you can be who you think you are unless you have a different birthday, unless you were born on February 6, 1967. And I thought, no, I was definitely born in 65. That's, I was here.
Yeah.
Because I have a half sister who was born on February 6th, 1967. I'm born on February 1st, 1965. And she had found the family using a search angel that she had met in New Jersey, where she still lived, and had found the family, I think, 3 weeks after our birth mother died. So everybody knew about her. But when I showed up, it was like, how could that possibly be? That can't be. And eventually, but then I spouted out all this info. Like I literally typed everything. And then this sister had this and this. And in hindsight, I wouldn't do that. That's somebody else's story. One of those two sisters had told the family. The other one didn't. So not surprisingly, she's not my biggest fan. But he didn't want me to meet the children that our mother had with her husband, because the husband was still alive, but he was ill, from what this brother knew. This brother was 10 years younger than our mother. And I said, well, I don't want to, what do we do? I don't want to mess up your life. I don't want to get in your way. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Okay, I'm going to be me. But it was still kind of bothering me. So I thought, let me find this other half sister, which I did. I found her and I wrote her a letter. So I thought, I'm not reaching out to the other children. And when I found her, and again, the world is really weird, or the universe or whatever, because I wrote her this letter and sent it to an address that I found online by doing my own searching. Turns out they had moved. And turns out she spends like a month and a half at the shore every year. So it had moved and the letter got forwarded, but then it sat on a table for a month and a half. So I thought, well, that's it. Too bad. I'm never going to find these people. But then she apparently, when they got home from the shore, her daughter saw and the letter had opened, in this process. So the daughter, my niece, saw this and kind of opened it, started reading it, and went, Mom, have you read this? She's like, no, I haven't gone through the mail. And then she called me that night. And then she said, and I said, well, she's like, have you talked to Kimberly and da-da-da-da? And I said, no, because Uncle Paul said not to. And she has the same birthday as Uncle Paul, which is why he was so sure about the birthday. And I said, no, because he asked me not to. She said, I don't think he knows what he's talking about. I'm calling Kimberly right now. And I was living in Tucson at the time. And that night, or the next night, I got a call from the two sisters that our mother had kept. And then that same Christmas, I think this was like in June or July, at Christmas time, I flew east, and my husband and I went up to New Jersey to Larry, that was our mother's husband, his house, and met everybody. So it turned out, as good as you can imagine. But 52 years, people, that's crazy. Shouldn't have to wait that long.
Wow. It's interesting that, I just like you, I talk to people and hear these stories, and I feel like there's never a shortage of surprise in what I hear. So I
Yep.
definitely felt some of that here talking to you about it. I'm wondering, if I step back a little bit, if I were to talk about, let's say, the adoption fog, do you ever feel like you were in the fog, or is that something you relate to? Because I know you said you knew from very early on, or you always knew you were adopted. Is that a concept for you?
It is a concept for me, but for me, it's much more, it was taking off the rose-colored glasses, right? I don't know that for me, it's just this slow unveiling, these layers, right? Like, oh, well, that's why I do that, because I'm a super achiever. Um, I'm that one. I'm a super achiever, but I'm also a very agile leaver. Very good. I know the back door for anything to get out before anybody else can ask me to leave. So, but it took me a lot of my own introspection. And so the rose colored glasses part is, and my mother didn't tell me that thing about the almost using a different agency probably until, I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago. So, I'm well into my healing work. But it still took me for a loop. But when I see some of our fellow adoptees and the deep the deep level of pain and suffering that is very real, I recognize that but for the grace of God go I. But because I always knew and I was always seeking and I've always been a seeker, it is like I take off those glasses, like, yeah, it really wasn't all that fabulous. There's a lot of crap. Um, but some would say there's a lot in my astrological chart, my numerological chart, like all of those things that I am here to unravel all of these mysteries, like of who I am, because how can I help somebody else otherwise? So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, it actually does. And I try to be particular about asking the question in a certain way, because it is not something everybody identifies with. It was very strong as an experience for me to come out of the fog, but I know that it's not universal. I just feel like a lot of people have this. And even the unveiling and the peeling away of layers, I think even post fog, that's how I experience still what's happening with me, which I describe as coming even further out for myself. So I think that was very relatable to describe it that way. And you've disclosed some things that lead to one of the next questions, which is the way you think adoption showed up in your life growing up. Because you talked about being a leaver, and I understand where you're coming from in saying that, but how do you feel like adoption showed up in your life growing up in terms of behaviors or things you were thinking about? It's kind of a complex question, but you see
Yeah,
anything?
I like the question. I I have a friend who is, well, I have many friends that are gay, but I have one friend who I'm very close to. And he said to me, Peggie, I'm really tired of always having to be like the gay spokesperson. I also am a dad, like all of these things. And so when I think about adoption and its effect, like as he said, I've always known this about me. It's kind of hard to ask me what it would be like if it wasn't, and I sometimes have that response in this way. But the ways that it has shown up is I don't, um, I have a hard time trusting people. I don't like to fail, right? I am on that side of the spectrum that if I can't be great at it. I don't want to do it. I've had a hard time being a beginner in my life, which is ironic because you're always a beginner no matter what you do. I try a lot of things. I've moved a lot. Um, and I would say maybe it wasn't consciously coming out of the fog, but around the time that this was really starting to, before my 50s, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, with a gut disease. But I realized as I'm connecting dots, I had these weird skin issues when I was a little kid, and then they went away. And then I had, other relatable issues, throughout my life. So I think, as I work on all of this journey, healing is healing. Um, but the body does keep the score. And I know that that was one of the things. I was so eager to find my birth people in many ways, but I also wanted to know, does anybody else have this thing? Because they're telling me that it's genetic, and nobody does.
Mm.
I mean, they have other relatable things, right? Because we're finding how depression and diabetes and bipolar, all of these things can be related, right, into our gut. And so we do have those things in my family, but nobody has the same thing that I do. So it's infiltrated every piece of my life, but I don't know how to not be adopted.
Yeah, that's what I've said as well. I sometimes can think I'll just toggle over to what it would be like to be someone who was kept, and I can't. I can approximate it in my mind what I think it would be like, but I can't know it. But I think I convince myself at times that I can know it. Why don't I just act like this instead? I think that's where the masking comes in, at least for adoptees, right?
Yeah.
Something else in other correspondence I've had with you and listening to some of the podcasts, you said I had to make sure, and even earlier, everybody was okay. All their feelings were okay. When you found you, was it too late in the life of your adoptive parents when you found biological family? Did you have to make sure your adoptive family was okay when you found them?
I was conscious of not being too excited. They were both alive. In that process, I also discovered that my adoptive mother is my sixth cousin. So because her brother and I are a match, so even though she's not done it, um, you know, and when I told my parents that, because my mom thought that was fascinating, they always want to know how things are going, or they did. My father was like, well, isn't everybody, related, from Adam and Eve? And I was just like, well, that is a very classic answer from my father. And, so I was sensitive to, like, I don't spend a lot of time talking about my bio family, but I don't not talk about them. Like if I'm going to go see them, or, they call when I'm at, my mom, oh, and one of my half sisters had come to visit right before my dad died with her husband and son, my nephew. And so they met both my parents. And I think that was good for them to meet her, and they love her. I think my mother is surprising me, in her more older years, maybe because she's got to depend on me. I don't know.
Very well be. I'm wondering, I thought I detected somewhat of a nomadic tendency in you. Do you sense that in yourself? A restlessness, like I got to move on or go places, or I have to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. My family was not in the military, because when I tell people, oh, I've moved like 36 times, they're like, oh, well, then, you must have had somebody in the military. Nope. Um, my dad had the same job my whole life. They stayed in New Jersey until 2000. And then they moved here to Williamsburg. And my husband will tell you that a big refrain in our life was, I want to settle down. I want to have a house. I just want to have one place. And the truth is, when we had that, then I started thinking, well, what about that house? What about that house? And I'm realizing that's that's, thank God for therapy in my opinion, but it's also moving into that understanding what is it about me that needs to keep moving, and how are other ways that I can um, do that in a healthy way and still put, like, I don't, now that I realize, I think I was afraid to put down roots. So now I have roots, I honestly don't love Williamsburg, but it is where we are.
I think,
So,
yeah, I think it all ties into what I want to ask you about career and the podcast, because I will first give a plug for Adoptees at Work as a really unique contribution into our dialogue. And even last night, we had a panel discussion. The adoptee on our panel mentioned the podcast. So people are noticing. I know they're flocking into your group, which is amazing. It's like people have something to say. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your career path and how you decided to start this podcast.
absolutely. I love talking about work. This is my safe spot. I, I, not only have I moved a lot, I've had a lot of jobs. And my favorite job has always been as a recruiter because I could talk to people and I could actually understand. First of all, you're talking to people with a parameter around it, right? I mean, recruiters don't just randomly walk into places and say, "What do you do? Let me see if I can find you a job." Although a lot of people think that's what we do. We don't do that. Um, we are I want to clarify for everybody who's ever called a recruiter or reached out to one on LinkedIn and said, "Can you find me a job?" Because we can't, probably. What we do is we are hired either by the company that we work for, if we're in-house recruiters, or by a company that is paying our agency to find them a very specific type of person, somebody who does something very specific, supply chain in aerospace, right? That understands working in a union environment. So my job is to have communication on both sides, really understand what the person who wants to hire somebody needs and why. What are they going to do during the day? How are they going to grow in their career? What do they want to do? And then go searching for the needle in a haystack, because usually the right person for the job already has a job where they're very happy. Not always, not in this particular economy, but usually. And so you're a little bit of a spy, you're a little bit of investigator, and you have to be able to quickly build rapport, particularly in today's times, right? Nobody has time for a rando person calling them or texting them. So I have to very quickly build that rapport. And I love doing that. So the Adoptees at Work came out of I had been playing, I had a blog talk radio show years ago called Awaken Your Soul, Awaken Your Intuition, something like that. But it was very cumbersome. And I really wanted to do something like that again. I really wanted to be able to talk to people, share stories, learn things. That's what you do as a recruiter. I don't know anything about supply chain or engineering or accounting, but I know I can learn enough to tell if somebody's lying to me. Um, so I wanted a podcast. I wanted to do this. And I was like, should I do one on how to make friends in your 50s, which is still not a bad idea. A lot of different ideas. And then I went to Harath, Hope and Healing retreat in New Jersey this past April. And I had just, like, weeks before, quit a very, I know we talk about me leaving a lot, but this job was just not just sucking my soul. The owner was a misogynist. It was a terrible place for me. And I was in a very bad spot. And over 50 something years, I managed to learn to spend less money than I made. And I knew I had money in the bank. And I don't recommend this for everybody, but I was very blessed. I also don't have children, to be able to say, I'm going to quit and find something else. And then I went to this retreat, no job. And it occurred to me, wait, I wanted to ask everybody, well, what do you do? How did you get into that? Oh, you're not going to believe it. When I found my birth family, they do the same thing, or I'm completely opposite, or I did this because my adoptive family told me to do this, but I really wished I had done that. And I think a lot of us, depending on the generation, may have some of that as well. We wanted to be safe and secure. So after a couple of weeks, then I came home and I think I messaged you, Greg, and I messaged Nicole as well from Fireside, which they were two people that I met through LinkedIn, actually. And they both were like, that's a really unique idea. And I thought, okay, well, let's try it. Let's try it. I don't have anything else going on. I have a part-time job, which has just morphed into a full-time job, but that's a whole other story. So there you have it. And I get to talk to the most amazing people every time that we have an interview. And I take these big, deep breaths in thinking, oh my gosh, we're doing these amazing things. Why, HR is getting better. I know a lot of people think recruiters are on the HR side. We kind of are, but we're also on marketing. But HR is starting to really pay attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a long way to go, but at least it's in their vocabulary. And I'm thinking, but we're not talking about being adopted, a lot of us at work, and maybe it doesn't come up, and that's okay. But when you have these moments where maybe you're coming out of the fog, or, maybe your dad died 2 years ago and you're with the same company, but now your other dad died, like like all of these things are really important for workplace cohesiveness. Companies are working harder to keep good people in place, and that's why you see these, let's be honest, it's about the bottom line, but that's why we've got these employee assistance programs and these employee resource groups. And we need to start talking about this so the younger adoptees that are in the world right now have the opportunity to say, yeah, it is what it is. And I'm here to help you. Like, I want to help them. And I want us to feel safe in our voices. There are still a lot of us that feel like if I talk about being adopted at work, I'm going to get fired, or they're going to hate me because the adoptive parents are so, wigged out. And there's a ton of people in my family in all parts of the spectrum, and they're following my work. I don't know how they really feel, but I can't be quiet anymore. So that's how it started, and I'm sorry.
That's exactly what I wanted to know. So thank you, because I knew there was a story behind it. I knew that, and you mentioned Nicole, and I know you because of Nicole through LinkedIn over a year ago now. Mm-hmm. And I was excited because I was only very dimly aware of, this is strange to say, of the presence of adoptees in the world, in the real world, in the world of commerce, in the world of doing things back and forth, of living in reality. And so that was an important connection that we made, and we started talking a little bit. And I remember seeing some of the things you were going through when you were changing positions, because you would have LinkedIn announcements about it, right? So for anyone who's not on LinkedIn, who's a professional, it's a great place to be. And you don't have to have a great professional profile to be there. You'll find a lot of people to connect to, and a lot of things that I've benefited greatly from. And I have found an adoptee community on there. There's an advocacy community, but there's also a professional community of adoptees as well. And so when you decided, let's talk to people about jobs, about careers, and the questions you ask, I've learned so much listening to the people you've been able to interview. And I hear you learning it too, because I know how it feels as somebody interviewing somebody. Oh my goodness, I hadn't thought of that. Or now that reflects on me. It's hard not to bring your own experience into it, because suddenly parts of you make more sense when you're talking to these people. So I feel like I wanted to say again what Nicole has said as well. It's just a really unique opportunity to have this, and I see the excitement of people signing up, wanting to do this. What has the reception been like for you for the podcast?
it's I want to go back to one thing. I very quickly focused on the fact that what I wanted to do was build a community, and that the community would feed itself, like in the best possible way, that we would take care of each other. In the past, I've had businesses where, I was very focused more on the how am I going to monetize this? How am I going to, and certainly I would love that. People feel free to pay me whatever you want. No, I'm just, kidding. But in this case, I was much more focused on I want to meet people, every one. So the response has been much bigger than I really expected. So, like many of us, I can doubt myself. I have imposter syndrome. Who wants to talk to me? There's a million podcasts out there, blah, 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 blah. So many people are better at this than I am. And whenever I have that moment, there's like I get a private message or I get a new person sign up, or everybody's been very kind and very eager. And I look at every single person who wants to be interviewed as like amazing. Like I can't, like I'm not like, oh, I have these, only I want these people, right? Like titans of industry or whatever. Like I want everybody. And I'm working hard, particularly on LinkedIn, to connect with people that maybe we all who maybe listen to more podcasts have not heard from. I'm trying to expand the voices, and I think allowing them to come in and share, yes, their adoption story, but more importantly that it's affected their work is important. So I've been surprised in a pleasant way. So far, everybody's been nice.
It was a wonderful experience for me, and it brought out things that I hadn't processed in terms of, because it's a great question. How do we show up at work? I think was part of the way you phrased the question. Or how do we not show up? I think you phrased it negatively as well. And I heard people talk about, I've had 40 jobs, or I've had only 2 jobs, or I've lasted 26 years in the same role that I have. And I remember some of the things you asked me, like, why do you think you didn't apply for anything internally? And I thought, I don't think I've ever dealt with that. I think I just thought I wasn't good enough to get something internally. So I depended on somebody saying, we'll advance you, or I went outside of the company to do that. But I feel like as a recruiter, you have this really natural way of being able to interact with people in a really effective manner as a podcaster. So I would like to encourage you in that sense and say again that it's a really valuable addition to the discourse that's happening among adoptees. And there are non-adopted people who are listening too. I know some who are, and I don't know if you ever hear from them, but I sometimes do.
Nobody tells me. No, but I know some of my friends are. So that's kind of nice. Yeah, it's humbling. And I will say that not all recruiters are like me, by the way. So just beware. If you ever want to know how to talk to a recruiter or what to expect, I'm happy to have those conversations with you, because I know job hunting is really annoying, and it can be painful. And that's something that I'm also very passionate about. I believe in my heart of hearts that everybody deserves to be happy at work, whatever their work is. There's no better or worse work, but you deserve to be happy when you're there. And if you're not, I want to help you figure that out. Because I believe if you're happy at work, you're a better partner and parent or community member. Like I truly believe we spend so much time there. Yeah, we have to make money, but it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to suck. Pardon my French. I mean, no job is perfect. I'm not going to lie to you. There's no such thing as the perfect job, but there are jobs that when you start to align who you are and where you want to be, and it's hard if this is not what you do all day, every day. So feel free, call me, email me, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I will give you ideas on how to tweak your profile.
That's very helpful stuff. Thank you for that. I think the very last thing I want to ask you is, what does it feel like to be on the other side of the questions now, to be receiving them? versus being the person. I think it feels different, but I'd like to hear what your thoughts are now that you've got your story out here and you've been on the other end of an interview as an adoptee.
It feels very different. This is not a topic that I talk about a lot in a public way. I mean, obviously people know I'm adopted. They've always known I'm adopted. But I don't normally get to go through my story. So it feels very freeing. Thank you. It feels a lot like it did at Harath Hope and Healing, which was the only place that I've ever felt 100%. I know it sounds like I'm giving them a plug, sorry. But like I walked in and I didn't have to be anybody else other than me, which was kind of nice for the first time. Like I didn't have to go into the backstory. Well, yes, of course I'm grateful. Yeah, no, I'm glad I'm not aborted. Like that stupid stuff that you have to deal with from well-meaning people. So it felt good. Thanks, Greg. You did a great job.
Thank you. Very unique interview. I think, have benefited greatly from your perspective and from the work you're doing because you are doing work and allowing adoptees a different perspective to their voices and a chance to reflect on things in their lives that maybe they haven't been thinking of. Because we do in our support groups in our communities, I think, tend to think kind of one way, and we do have all of these things in our lives also that are affected, including the thing we do mostly with our lives, which is work. So what an important thing to do, to ask people about that. How do you show up? How is it for you? What do you think could be good for you? It also helped me see, talking with you, that I'm finally, I think, in a good alignment with what I feel like I'm supposed to be doing. And I know that that's not always a place people get to. So I'm appreciative that the clarity that came from the interaction for that. So I wanted to thank you for coming here and being vulnerable. I'm excited you were able to get your story out here. And what we will do is we will end the recorded section here in just a second. You'll hear the announcement that the Zoom recording is ended. And then we do have some people that would like to ask you some questions. I'd like just to remind everybody that we will put this up on the Fireside Adoptees YouTube channel, probably in the next day or so. So it'll be available for anybody outside of the Fireside Adoptees private group to take a listen. So thanks again, Peggie. We really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate each of you.
Thank you.